The Navy SEALs, a clandestine group that has transformed into one of the most elite forces in the world over time. The evolutionary process of the U.S. Navy SEALs begins during World War II at Amphibious Training Base, Little Creek, Norfolk, Virginia. Starting in late August 1942, two special mission units were formed. These units were known as Amphibious Scouts and Raiders and Special Mission Naval Demolition Unit. SNR was a team of enlisted sailors and Army infantry used for reconnaissance missions, and the Special Mission Naval Demolition Unit was a group of Navy salvage divers. Launched in November of 1942 off the coast of French Morocco in North Africa, these groups were responsible for reconnaissance and the removal of cable booms during Operation Torch. SNR teams performed other operations, such as guiding ships and small crafts under withering fire. Their legacy capabilities are now carried out by today's SWCC operators. By May 6, 1943, the Chief of Naval Operations directed the Naval Demolition Project, a two-phase project which would include the initial plans for future Naval Combat Demolition Units, or NCDUs. As plans for a massive cross-channel invasion of Europe began, Lieutenant Commander Draper Kaufman was directed to establish a school to train specialized units to eliminate obstacles on enemy-held beaches. On June 6, 1943, the NCDU training school was established in Fort Pierce, Florida, and in September of 1943, the first NCDU class graduated after several months of arduous training. In the end, a total of 24 NCDUs would be in England in preparation for D-Day. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The NCDUs at Omaha Beach and Utah Beach were able to penetrate German defenses. 37 were killed and 71 wounded, making D-Day the bloodiest single day in the history of naval special warfare. However, none of the casualties were due to improper handling of explosives, an important fact in Navy SEAL history. In the Pacific Campaign, many of the early Fort Pierce-trained NCDUs were deployed. Known as MacArthur's Frogmen, these units operated primarily in the Southwest Pacific. Other units, such as Special Services Unit 1 and the Sino-American Cooperative Organization, branches of SNR, also operated in the Pacific. On November 22, 1943, during the Tarawa landing, hundreds of Marines died from enemy fire and drowning due to hitting a submerged reef that was mistaken for land. Due to the horrific events, Admiral Kelly Turner, commander of the 5th Amphibious Force, directed that 30 officers and 150 enlisted men be moved to Waimanalo Amphibious Training Base. It was here that the UDTs of the Pacific were born. Between December 1944 and August 1945, UDT men operated in every major amphibious landing. Yet as quickly as the UDTs were formed during World War II, they were just as quickly disbanded.
This is war.
UDTs would not be called on again until 1950 during the height of the Korean War. At this time, UDT men were responsible for marking low points in the channel, clearing fouled propellers, and searching for landmines. UDTs also conducted beach and river reconnaissance and infiltrated guerrillas behind the lines from sea. Navy frogmen conducted the first UDT raid of the Korean War, as well as the first combat dive using an aqualung. Their last operation would be Operation Fishnet, responsible for crippling North Korea's food supplies by destroying its fishing nets. During the post-Korean War period, President Eisenhower addressed small conflicts involving U.S. interests using specialized forces such as UDT, Green Beret Special Forces, and Force Reconnaissance Units. Unconventional warfare became a growing need in 1960 during the crises in Laos and Cuba. Thus, in 1961, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Arleigh A. Burke directed the OpNav staff to organize new or existing Navy units for smaller conflicts. Admiral Wallace M. Beakley addressed a memo to the CNO that proposed a detailed mission and task statement for SEAL teams. Finally, on March 25, 1961, President Kennedy addressed Congress to establish unconventional warfare units in response to urgent national needs. 2 SEAL teams were officially authorized by December 1961, and both units were established in January 1962. Their mission? Conduct unconventional warfare, counter-guerrilla warfare, and clandestine operations. It was at that moment the Navy SEALs, as we know them, were born. Few know how the U.S. Navy SEALs became the well-known and feared warriors they are today. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Vietnam, their actions have had a direct impact on history. The years after their formal designation would be filled with both combat and non-combat accomplishments that make up their legacy. Starting in the late 1950s, underwater demolition men, known as UDTs, set the foundation for the leapfrogs. In 1964, the concept of a small demonstration team was approved. Then, in 1969, under the leadership of Lieutenant Scotty Lyon, the Navy parachute team was officially designated by the Navy Recruiting Command. The Leapfrogs are made up of 15 highly trained team members who volunteer for a 3-year tour. Some say the SEALs have no boundaries. They operate at sea, in the air, on land, and even in space. NASA relied heavily on UDT operators to assist with astronaut survival and recovery in the late 1950s. In 1969, Frogmen performed a miraculous recovery in front of an international television audience of 500 million when the Apollo 11 command module Columbia capsized on landing in the Pacific Ocean. The men recovered the astronauts within several minutes. While SEALs succeeded in non-combat operations, the threat of communism grew around the world. Frogmen were called on to fight once more. In January 1962, SEAL Team 1 deployed to South Vietnam to train local forces in the tactics and techniques of maritime commandos during the fight against the communist Viet Cong guerrillas. By mid-1968, SEALs began carrying out day and night ambushes, hit-and-run raids, reconnaissance patrols, and special intelligence collections operations. During the war, SEALs gained a reputation as fearsome and extraordinary warriors. They were known as the Men with Green Faces. In 1983, tensions between the U.S. and the island nation of Grenada boiled over. The U.S. launched an invasion with 2 goals in mind: take U.S. citizens off the island and overthrow the communist government. But tragedy struck before the invasion even started. During the airborne insertion, 4 SEALs drowned off the island's coast due to low visibility and high waves. Their bodies were never recovered. During the assault, SEALs successfully extracted Grenada's Governor-General Sir Paul Scoon and captured Grenada's only radio tower. Even though Operation Urgent Fury was a success, the operation was an example of poor joint preparedness due to inter-service rivalry. This led to the Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act of October 4, 1986. The act would have its first successful test during Operation Just Cause in Panama. On the night of December 19, 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama to execute an arrest warrant against Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, a former ally of the U.S., on charges of drug trafficking. SEALs infiltrated the southern end of an airfield at night to dispose of Noriega's Learjet. Then the firefight began. During the initial volley, 8 of the 9 SEALs were wounded. Several other SEALs were killed across the airfield. Chief Engineman Don McFall realized his comrades were exposed and pulled wounded teammates to safety. In the ultimate sacrifice, he laid himself across the teammate to protect him, and was killed. McFall was awarded the Navy Cross, and USS McFall, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, was named in his honor. As the threat of communism slowly faltered, a new enemy was coming to light: Al-Qaeda. Once again, America would call on these elite commandos.